All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give another 60 seconds for our straggler participants to filter in, and then we'll get underway. All right, that's 2 minutes after the hour. Let's get started. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Omar Bimji. I'm the Sustainability Services Manager for SES Consulting, and I am welcoming you to today's ZebEx Lunch and Learn session. Today, we're going to be looking at practical approaches to retrofitting buildings without renoviction and by minimizing disruptions to the residents and occupants as much as possible. We are looking at this because retrofits are something that, if you're joining us today, are probably near and dear to your heart, if not professional heart. And as more of these projects come on board, we're going to figure out the ways to do them that create the less disruption for stakeholders across the board, including the folks who live, work, and play in our buildings. Going to run through a bit of an agenda, and then I will introduce our two presenters for the day. So yeah, that's the first step, introductions. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit after we've introduced our presenters about the Fortis Deep Energy Retrofit Pilot Program. That's the program that's enabled one of the retrofits that we're going to be focusing on. And I'm going to give a little bit of context before I hand it over and we dig into that project. We're going to be looking at, as I mentioned, one particular project. That's the retrofit, the deep energy retrofit of the Forte building. After we've gone through that, we're going to get an overview of a seminal publication that's nearing about 5 years old, the Field Guide to Retrofits in Occupied Buildings, from one of the writers and main sort of agitators behind it. And after that, we've got some burning questions that have been plaguing me for the last little while that I'm going to get a chance to ask to our two panelists. And then we're going to open it up to the rest of you and hopefully have some interesting questions to flesh things out and lively discussion as is so typical of these sessions. So today, as I mentioned, beyond myself, we've got two participants to present on the topic at hand. Candice Leroux is the Regional Property Manager for BentallGreenOak here in Vancouver. She's got over 30 years of experience in the real estate management field, and she is the president of an organization that spans across Canada. Candice is going to have to remind me what it is, past president. And so has, quite a profile in this field and a lot of experience to draw from in her presentation today. We've also got Yael Santopinto joining us from Toronto. Yael is the architect, principal, and practice lead for ERA Architects. She is their lead for the Tower Renewal piece and is a specialty in an expertise with retrofits with residents in place. So she's going to be digging into the field guide and talking about her experience professional on this front. So as I promised, a little bit of an introduction to the Fortis Deep Energy Retrofit Pilot Program. Now, this is a program that's been going on for a few years now that I've been a member of in the implementation side. And the scope of it, what we're trying to accomplish with the program, is implementing deep energy retrofits that improve building energy and environmental performance through a holistic approach that targets the envelope and the mechanical systems and everything that really enables energy and emissions reduction to happen. It covered 20 single-family homes across BC and 4 multi-unit residential buildings. Now, what the deep energy retrofits, that's always a little bit of a moving target, what exactly is trying to be achieved there. But what the Fortis program tried to do was reduce energy and emissions both by at least 50% while retaining natural gas as the primary source of heating and power. And the goal of the program for Fortis was to inform future education and incentive programs that the utility wanted to bring on board. More broadly, the opportunity to implement all these deep retrofits really had a goal of furthering our understanding and practice in terms of the participants who've been involved, but also as we get to share our learnings, hopefully more broadly in the building and retrofit sector. I wanted to mention that all of the emission reduction measures that were part of the program and each of the individual projects were covered by Fortis. One of the agreements that they made with the building owners is that none of the investments that were made there could be the basis of rent increases. So it really was, even in its conceptual phase, designed to be as low impact on the residents as possible. Started the program itself in, I believe, July of 2022. Actually, no, it would have been in the winter of 2022, putting the word out and recruiting potential participants, reviewing the buildings and seeing what the potential was of the buildings that were out there. Once we had 3 and then later 4 participants in place, we moved on in 2023 to design, went through a high-level conceptual or schematic design exercise, a much more rigorous detailed design exercise, and came up with the exact methodology that we were going to use to implement these retrofits. Construction was phased, but took the better part of a year for all of the projects involved. And now in 2025, we've moved on to measurement and verification, trying to get a sense outside of the modeled promises that we had, what the actual impacts were of these projects, and what we can learn from the performance of all the different measures that were put in place. So today, we're going to be talking about polls. You probably have a bit of a poll jumping up on your screen, so hoping you can give us a bit of information about who you are, so we know who's in the virtual room with us. But more specifically, and then when I hand it over to Candice, we're going to be talking about the Forte Deep Energy Retrofit. Forte is a 13-story concrete high-rise multi-unit residential building here in Vancouver, built just over 50 years ago, owned by BentallGreenOak. And the retrofit itself had a lot of different energy reduction or energy conservation / emission reduction measures. They tore apart the roof and added a bunch of additional insulation there. Windows and screen doors were all replaced from, I think, single pane up to triple glazed units. There were a lot of air tightness improvements, just trying to shore up the building envelope without actually getting into external cladding. Building like this, it was determined not to really be feasible to totally overclad the entire thing. The boilers that were the primary sources of heat for space and deep and domestic hot water were replaced primarily with gas heat pumps with high efficiency condensing boilers to serve as backups. We added heat recovery ventilators, little HRVs, ductless units that made sure that with all of the envelope upgrades, it was still comfortable and we were getting fresh air and making sure that the environmental conditions were good inside the building. We had cooling ready upgrades. So there were, I guess, ports, insulated ports that were added to each of the suites to enable residents to add their own AC units down the line if they wanted additional comfort. Solar thermal preheat units up on the roof, so preheating domestic hot water before it went into the heating plant itself. And then makeup air units were, I don't remember if they were replaced or just upgraded with internal cooling to add a little bit more energy efficiency and then cooling and comfort to the building. So that's it from my side. I'm going to turn it now over to Candice Leroux to talk about the Deep Energy Retrofit project at Forte in a bit more detail, and also to give us a sense of the impact and lack thereof on tenants who were involved. So Candice, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, can you all see my screen? Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, so kicking off with Forte, BentallGreenOak, as many of you will know, is a pretty large company across multiple countries with many different aspects of our business. We do retail, commercial, rental, and industrial. So myself, based in Vancouver, we're extremely proud to be involved in this project. I'm a regional property manager, been with Bental for just going on to 13 years. I manage all the operations for the BC residential portfolio. Obviously, to manage third party, I need to be licensed in BC. Past president of the Real Estate Institute of Canada. I also have instructor abilities through the Institute. And as you can all hear from my voice, I originate from South Africa and I did a human resource diploma in the retail industry back home. So when came to Canada, changed my career completely. We were extremely excited to be part of this project when we were on the shortlist and eventually nominated. For us, this was an extremely exciting project because beside us, we had just built a brand new building. So Forte in itself was looking really very different to what it currently looks like. I always used to refer to it as the sexy cousin to the brand new building. And the project in itself was an unknown entity to us. When we started the project, there were many, many aspects of this project that were very moving. And if you can have a look at the picture on the screen right now, I mean, as Omar has alluded to, we did the roof, we did the windows, air tightness, the gas heat pumps, recovery ventilation, makeup air units, cooling upgrades, solar. But one of the biggest things I want you to have a look at this build in this picture is the blue cladding that covered the building. Um, we worked around the building, so we started in the front and we moved left around the building, and eventually the whole building was covered with this blue screen. Bearing that in mind, the time that we went into this project was fall and December, which is, as you all know, those of you that reside here in Vancouver, can be extremely gloomy for us. One of the biggest challenges none of us were prepared for, although we were really excited with the project, was the magnitude of this project. We had sat into many, many presentations, but from an operational perspective on the ground, working with the site team and residents, the magnitude of the project was way bigger than we had anticipated. Another thing that was really interesting and maybe caught us off guard was the numerous moving parts that were part of this project that we knew were going to happen, but didn't quite understand to what degree. Our own staff, the trades, the consultants, the GC on site, everybody. There were so many different moving parts and moving trades. And one of the things I think we perhaps omitted to bear in mind during this process was we still had to run our business. Our business continued to run throughout this process. So we still had to rent suites. We still had people moving in. We had people moving in. We still had to maintain it. And one of the things that we did find was very trying was the demands that the project had on the site team staff, um, residents, numerous entries into their homes. Um, some residents had absolutely no issue with us, but we did have quite a handful of them that found it extremely intrusive. And as renters, um, perhaps had a different perception of what this intrusion was versus an owner. An owner can be can be much more understanding than an actual renter is. Um, we had to eventually hire security a company to assist with the trades going in and out of the suites to make sure that those units were always monitored at all times, that there was somebody standing in the hallway making sure that the trades were going in and out, because they were accessing multiple units at one time. The one point that I mentioned earlier on about that blue cover or top, whatever you want to call it, over the building, that actually created an incredible amount of stress for residents, um, especially the fall and the winter months, because they felt that they were going stir crazy with not getting in any natural light. And it became such a huge bone of contention. So If this project is going forward and I'm having to do another one, I would almost ask that a white cover be considered as an alternative. Another huge problem that we dealt with was construction schedules. Residents don't care if someone is sick. They don't care if a trade doesn't pitch up for the day because of something that's happened, or if a product didn't come in. They really don't care, and they blamed us for those issues. And we understand those issues happen in business because business is business. If a product isn't, or it's stuck at the border, we can't do anything about it. Residents didn't care about that. So there were a lot of challenges to start off with. And as we worked through this project, one of the great things that we did was we did have an open house prior to the project starting. We did separate emails. We actually set up a separate email account that we monitored to deal just with resident concerns specifically about the project, because what we found in the initial startup was those emails were getting mixed in with our day-to-day operations. So we had to separate them and manage them completely separately. We had a tracker that we monitored concerns. And one of the things that we implemented right from the get-go was weekly communications. And we did it twofold. We met with our contractor on site on a weekly basis to see what was happening, how things were going, and we communicated all of this information to the residents. One of the things that you can see is the complaints. The schedule was one of the biggest complaints that we actually had versus loss of quiet enjoyment, which was quite interesting how people perceive things differently to what we would have perceived were bigger complaints. So it was a really interesting lesson for us to learn throughout this project on how people viewed things differently and how we could attend and sort these concerns out with the trades. And one of the biggest things I really want to mention today was the trade that did the work, the company that was on site, were incredibly helpful. If we had an issue, the person would attend to it straight away, and it really made a huge impact on the project. Lessons learned. One of the things, if I were to do this again, I would perhaps hold a different type of open house for the specific project. Um, People are very technical. There's a lot of experts that reside in these buildings. And one of the things that we learned was they kept asking us, what kind of product? What does it look like? How is it going to work? And I couldn't answer all of those questions. And when we rolled out the project and we had the pre-workout meeting, we didn't have that information or samples to show people. And I think that would have been very beneficial at the time to actually have a sample of a window and show people what the differences were going to be. What is an HRV? In layman's terms, many people didn't understand it and the benefits that they would derive from that. So going forward, I'd almost say as a suggestion, it would be great that people could see, touch, feel, and have somebody explaining those different products to them. Staffing, without a question, we were not staffed correctly. I would recommend definitely bringing on a dedicated person to deal with this project, because your building still has to run, and you will burn out your staff if you don't bring additional people in. Those weekly meetings that we set up with the GC and the operational teams were invaluable. I cannot re-emphasize how important they were. It was as if we were one cohesive group of people talking the same language throughout the process. Weekly communications to residents, again, we felt at times that we were over communicating, giving too much information, but I would much rather do that than leave people uninformed. And our complaint monitoring, we try to deal with them as quickly as they came in, so that people felt they were being heard. And if there was anything we could do to help and mitigate the issue that was happening, we certainly did that. If I were to do this all over again, I promise I would change quite a few things based on this information. When we finished the project, we were exhausted. Residents were exhausted, and we actually did a boat cruise out of Vancouver, and you can see the smiles and the happiness of folks at the end of the project. We were blessed by an incredible day for this. People got the opportunity to mingle, to talk about the project. We had so many people come up to us afterwards and say, thank you. You know, we know that you guys did an incredible job. We're very grateful for what happened. All those bad vibes that had come from the stresses had disappeared almost overnight. That was the view when we came back into harbour from the project. It was really, really interesting. It was a beautiful evening. It poured the day before and it poured the day after. So we were blessed with an incredible day. And then just to add a little bit of pizzazz to the project, we were awarded a BOMA Best Award for the year, part of the project that we did. So we were very, very proud. Thanks, guys, for listening to me from the hands-on experience that we had on site. I'm going to stop sharing right now, so if there are any questions.
There was one question in the chat, Candice, from Roberto. He was asking whether you had a dedicated full-time tenant liaison, and from the second half of the project, and you know, from my experience, that was something that you sort of identified as a lesson learned, a resource that it would have been really great to have. And just to share a little bit of a story there, when I debriefed with the BGO team afterwards, after the project had wrapped up, and mentioned the field guide to retrofitting with residents in place. Candice asked for a copy. I sent it to her, and a couple of days later, I got an email saying, "I'm really mad at you that you didn't send this beforehand because there were so many lessons that we had to learn the hard way." So yeah, I'll take the L for that, and probably use it as a good opportunity to turn things over to Yael, one of the authors of the field guide, to yeah, run us through the background and the overview of the guide and what it has to teach all of us about retrofitting with residents in place.
Thanks so much, Omar. And, Candice, what a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to just share my screen here. Okay. So wonderful. So yeah, I'm Yael Santo Pinto. I'm principal with the Area Architects and director of research for the Tower Renewal Partnership, which is our sort of sister nonprofit. I'll talk a little bit for some context for our work as both practitioner architects working on deep energy retrofits like this one, just like the one I think Candice and Omar worked on. And then what caused us to sort of develop out that field guide and what we've learned since then, because we did publish that now 5 years ago. Okay, sorry, bit of a technical challenge here. I see I'm not full screen, so I'm just going to jump right out for a second and come back in as full screen. Apologies. Okay, that should be good. Okay, so I mean, this building type that I think is the same building type we just looked at in the previous project really is the basis of our work around tower renewal. few years back in 2016, we were able to do some bean counting across the country in the major municipalities, looking at what share of our high-rise stock is indeed from this era. And the dark navy is across the country forms a major part of our largely rental housing supply. And so you can see something like 740,000 units in this building type across the country, and probably many more because we didn't sample every municipality. But as we know, and I think probably the impetus for many of these projects is not just carbon, not just energy and operational cost reductions, but is in fact end of life on major building systems that's causing owners to say, well, we need to make major upgrades. How do we do that? And, this is an example in Toronto from a few years back where an electrical failure led to evacuation of one building overnight. 1,000 families, 1,000 individuals without a home, and without a home for over a year. And just the tax on our system of losing one building, our system could not handle that. What if it were two? What if it were three? And so we started about 15 years ago asking the question, what might it look like to give a second life to some of the this incredible stock of multi-unit housing that we built en masse between the 50s and the 80s, and we called that Tower Renewal. At the time, and we continue to talk about it, not just as deep energy retrofits, but also kind of more holistically, how are these buildings now more integrated into cities that are now built for walkability rather than at the time often built for the car. And that isn't consistent across all scenarios, but in many, these tend to be located in our inner suburbs. So when we started asking that question, we very quickly realized as architects that there were some fairly well understood technical solutions to modernizing our aging housing supply, but that the issues were actually very systemic. The challenges were really systemic. They were around financing. They were around to what standard? What do we mean when we say a deep energy retrofit, and how would we know when we've reached one? And then largely, and that's what we'll talk about today, is capacity building within the industry. And that goes from owners, tenants, architects and engineers, and the trades and construction and manufacturing. And I'll speak about that at the end. So because we realized quickly this was less of an architectural issue and more of a systems issue, we created this organization, the Tower Renewal Partnership. We built relationships with organizations across the country who were looking at similar issues and began to actually publish sort of research findings, case studies, and in some case policy pieces that we felt could help create a more enabling environment. And it's interesting because since, 15 years ago, when we started talking about this sort of is a map that shows you towards the right. There's a lot of movement, and this is just a select piece of how, programs, policies, local regulations and bylaws, and also major funding programs, let's say from the National Housing Strategy, have really changed the landscape. And I think we've showed this slide several times. I'm sure those on the call who we know have seen this before, but this is sort of like a constellation of the incredible efforts across the country from Pembina and others in BC working on prefabricated retrofits across to the East Coast with Recover. There are many people working on this, and this shows, some excellent projects from RDH, Levitt Goodman, projects in Quebec and Ontario that look at how that constellation is changing. We are well past the pilot phase, and how do we build and share learnings to really bring this into the kind of widespread implementation phase? So when we started going into buildings like this, obviously we realized while there were many, many, many different configurations of buildings and communities living in them, that buildings built in this sort of post-war era has shared many technical challenges. We won't go into a lot of the technical details today, but last on this list was, well, they're all occupied and we don't have places to decant folks while we do these kinds of retrofits. So we were able to work through CMHC funding and in partnership with Acorn Canada, a tenant and other social issues advocacy group, excuse me, and Evergreen, Mars, and others, as well as a number of trades through the North American Insulating Manufacturers Association to build this field guide. So we collected experiences from across the country. We collected experiences from trades, from residents. We collected experience as much as we could from owners as well, and tried to break down retrofits into here 5 stages. From the early planning phase, how do you even scope, plan, fund, and prepare, all the way through to design, construction, and construction in your home. And then post-occupancy. And so from each stage, we tried to give considerations for owners, considerations for contractors who often don't know what to plan and budget for and how to price that kind of work. And then recommendations at each stage also for tenants. What might their rights be? What might considerations be, et cetera. The other thing we were able to do through this work is actually learn from our peers. And here you see on the right us in BC, in fact, learning from a fantastic project undertaken by BC Housing in Vancouver with residents in place with a tenant liaison role. Also partners in Germany, where they were piloting some prefabrication techniques, and in the UK, where they were also had this incredibly resourced construction management team that was properly prepared to do the tenant work. And so kind of a range of approaches and techniques we learned from there. This is the project in Germany with the prefabrication. I'll speak more about that at the end. And then just a couple sample pages on solutions or different tactics that we thought might require further development. The tenant liaison role, I know people have talked about that in the chat, but developing out standardized language and RFP language that owners can put into their construction management documents, so they don't have to create those from scratch. What are you asking the constructor to provide, for example? Specialized trades training. We know that there are many, many, many excellent trades out there who could be prepared to walk into someone's home and do work, but that's not necessarily who's being brought onto jobs. And are there proper certifications or even lightweight training that can be required at the beginning of a project to help prepare? And, you know, as far as I know, not providing it yet, but an image here from BCIT's excellent high performance buildings lab, which, you know, these kinds of labs could be providing that kind of service. And then, of course, and I think we cannot talk about deep energy retrofits, holistic ones, without talking about renoviction. And certainly when we spoke to Acorn members across the country, that was the #1 issue. How do I ensure I will have security in my home? Will my rents go up? Will I be renovicted? And so we had to then, you know, begin to develop some recommendations and priority setting around renoviction policy. And I would point this group toward Acorn's excellent Ontario-based report that just came out in 2024 on the state of affairs and renovictions in Ontario, which is very interesting, and where policy is going on that. And if the group will kind of give me another 4 or 5 minutes, Omar, am I okay? Just to kind of speak about where we've gone since that time?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, fantastic. So did a lot of work since 2020 and since we did that retrofit field guide, and a lot of work with residents in place, some with sort of phased strategies, some directly in people's homes, et cetera. And we've learned a lot since that time. And I just wanted to speak to one technique that we are currently about to start construction on here in Toronto at a building called 444 Logan, owned by Woodgreen, Toronto's largest nonprofit housing provider, a seniors affordable housing building. And the strategy here is, and I think those on the call will be very familiar with this strategy, but how it's actually a big challenge is using a panelized and outside-in approach to minimize disruption. So the key objectives on this building, yes, address a major backlog of capital repair. Yes, achieve CAGBC's zero carbon building standard. But number one, will we be successful? We won't know that until we know if we've minimized disruption to people in their homes. I'll show you. So that's the building on the right, 444 Logan Avenue, a 20-story building, 160 units built in 1967. And the approach that we're taking here is panelization. We know that prefabrication can reduce construction duration. It can seriously minimize work in suites. And of course, you get a high level of QA/QC from shop-built products. However, there are very few retrofit-ready panelized assemblies on the market. We know that the mass timber industry has really accelerated panelization in new construction, but there are a number of critical risks associated with doing it in retrofit, and that is why we're not seeing many retrofit-ready products with all their certifications ready to go, installed track records, that kind of thing. And I'm speaking in Ontario context and would love to hear from this group if there are more advanced and piloted technologies out there in BC. The approach we're using here is not just an envelope recladding project, but it's also a new HVAC system. So what we're doing is bringing in our distribution integrated into the cladding, sandwiched in between the exterior building and the new envelope. So pulling hydronic lines up through the building and tying them into air source heat pumps at the roof and low voltage fan coils inside the units. So it's a simple, of course, nothing is simple, core into suites to install those fan coils. And once the cladding is on and the new windows are on from the exterior, one quick removal of the window from the interior and a kind of prefab millwork piece placed on top. So we're going into construction in the next month or so. So we're early, but I will say a lot of budget, effort, and focus has been placed on a tenant's first approach here. The contractor has provided not just a kind of scheduling tenant liaison, but also a series of other supports, including movers, respite spaces, security, and also in some cases, we're going to be implementing a kind of PSW support because there are folks in here who have special needs and that kind of, who are more bedbound, who may have dementia, that kind of thing. So there's a whole set of social supports that are being deployed here as part of the tenant engagement strategy. In addition to mock-up suites, ongoing engagement and a kind of, I would say, a communication strategy that's very similar, Candace, to what you described. We are trying, and we've been able to work with TAF's Retrofit Accelerator to really try to develop lessons learned from this, to work very early with trades, to kind of push the industry on the panelization piece. It's IDP style without being IDP. It's a 5B kind of contract arrangement. And I will say through the accelerator, one thing we've been able to do is actually bring together people from across Canada and North America who are working on the kind of wicked problem of panelization and retrofits, drawing from the excellent work from Pembina out on the West Coast, Rocky Mountain Institute, NRCan, and the Atmospheric Fund, bringing those folks together, as well as many building owners and other nonprofits to really share where they're at, what they're seeing as some of the major issues. We were able to bring NYSERDA to that roundtable as well, who's done some projects in this manner. And some of the outcomes, and this is where I'm wrapping up, so sorry if I've gone over, but we are still in the early adopter phase. There's a lot of risk placed on owners who are trying to do this work, often in the nonprofit sector or in the rental sector. Retrofit solutions still have a lot of adaptation to variable conditions and are still deemed risky. From a manufacturing perspective, demand has been limited. So while you should, in theory, have it should be better, faster, cheaper, the cheaper part is not yet there. And we really need case studies to be aggregated to give people the confidence to take on this kind of project. So just one last slide, kind of talking about, practice, research. We need to be doing both. All of us out there in the field, we need to be collecting our efforts together to really tackle these emerging issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Yael. Yeah, we're a little bit over time, but it was cool to get a snapshot of this kind of new exciting process and technology that you guys are working into the next round of projects. Is Christy Love here still? I wanted to give Christy from RDH just a chance to talk about or supplement anything, because RDH was the construction manager for Forte, and so had a lot of its own sort of tenant and occupant facing pieces that were incorporated into the project as well. So just in case we missed anything there, Christy, did you have anything you wanted to add to the story for Forte?
Sure. Thanks, Omar. Hello, everyone. And I had a bit of a connectivity issue, so I may have missed some of the chat. I mean, I think Candace covered it really well. RDH has done construction management for retrofit projects for like 25 years. What was sort of above and beyond with this project was the fact that there was so much in-suite work. Like we're very used to doing enclosure work from the outside, but these projects require messing with the mechanical systems, new controls, new ventilation approaches. So yeah, I think we're and the next ones will be a lot better prepared for like managing the number of suite entries, which I think we're about, I don't know what they ended up being, Candace, but at least a dozen per suite when the project was complete. So yeah, I think there are lots of proven approaches out there for managing like an exterior-based retrofit with phasing of scaffolding, scaff net. But the sort of coordination of everything, I think, yeah, just needs that extra, like what Yale's talking about. It needs a lot more sort of hand-holding. And then also the fact that it is tenants in a rental building versus owners also made for a very different kind of interaction and experience, and sort of that need to mediate, that added some extra pressure on this project. So
Thanks, Christy. Yeah, I wanted to just address one of Roberto's questions in the chat about a tenant swing space, because it was something I think Yael mentioned at the end, some strategies, and Candace kind of undersold BGO's resourcing of that. There was a swing space that was offered, kind of constantly, accommodation for pets. Candace, did you want to speak to any of the other pieces? Because there
Yeah,
was a lot
sure.
of sort of things that BGO put in place to
Oh,
try to mitigate the ongoing impact on tenants.
definitely. We luckily for us, we had a building beside us that was new, so we allocated one of the lounges to the Forte residents, where we actually made it pet friendly throughout the project. We put on coffee and tea, and it is Wi-Fi accessible, so people were able to go in there, and they have a break and get away from it. We also took a couple of units where people started to feel really overwhelmed by noise. We had a couple of vacant suites that we set up with very simple desks and chairs that people could go in and work quietly or just have a quiet moment. We put on coffee and tea and donut mornings. We would issue gift cards for folks to go to a Timmy's or something else that was close by when we found that they really just needed a break. You can recognize where people were at breaking point, that they just needed to get out the building. Another thing we also did was we did also hire movers to move people's personal belongings and put them in storage in our building beside us, because we did have a lot of storage. And then we hired them back again to bring them back into the units once the project was completed. There was a lot of communication backwards and forwards, and sometimes people just needed to vent. So we did have quite a bit of that happening as well. But the good thing is, when I go into the building now, that is all forgotten. That's gone. And people say, oh, the windows. And I'll tell you, the windows have got the most incredible feedback, because the property is located on near Barrard Street, which is really noisy. You can hear absolutely nothing. So the feedback from that perspective has been really positive. But yeah, we really tried everything in our power to make it as comfortable as we could. But as all of you know, noise travels. And thankfully, we were lucky enough to have the building beside us that really made a big impact.
Thanks, Candace. I wanted to mention one other thing that you noted in your presentation that I had some, I won't say fun, but I found interesting when I was digging through all the tenant sort of matrix that we put together to capture all the feedback. There were a lot of complaints and concerns around scheduling when tenants and residents were being given, a set of days when folks would show up and do work, and for a number of reasons that you mentioned, Candace, that didn't always come through. And there was a low level of tolerance for, that anticipated disruption, folks making plans and scheduling things, and then, nobody showing up and knowing work wasn't going to get done. And so it was, I know that was a perpetual balancing act for the construction management team, for trades, for everyone to, try to be as close to that as possible. But it was interesting to know that that was a really strong source of frustration, almost as much as the impacts themselves. It almost felt like residents were able to, sort of gird themselves for the impact and the disruption. But when there was that record scratch moment of, things not actually panning out, it did sort of set off another kind of frustration that folks weren't really ready for. So I'm not sure how to tighten that up. I feel like, given the scale of the retrofit and how quick, how close to being, on schedule it was, I don't know that it could have gone any tighter, but it was an interesting, unanticipated source of frustration for folks who live there.
Absolutely. It was really challenging. And as Christy alluded to, sometimes we give notice and all a trade needed to do was go in and check it. And they would assume we were going to be there all day. And then they would vacate for the whole day. But all that was required was to go in and check work that had been done the day before. And it's really difficult to know what is coming. So you do your due diligence, and we have to abide by legislation and make sure that we gave notices out within the legal parameters that we were allowed to, because you've got to give 3 days notice in advance for everything. And there's a lot of moving parts, and sometimes a trade, you've done all the notices and they have a cancellation. People don't get that. They don't care. We're the bad people at the end of it. But I think it worked. It did work well. Yes, there were lots of hiccups along the way, but we managed through them. And the team from RDH, the site team that were there, really helped us with that, to understand, because my site teams didn't necessarily always understand the mechanisms that were involved. So having that expertise on site really did make a big difference, explaining it to people.
Yeah, you mentioned this new initiative and this panelized tower project that's coming down the pipe and the learnings that might come from that. I'm wondering if there's anything else that TRP or any of the practitioners you've talked to have learned about retrofitting with residents or occupants in place that might make it into the next version of the guide, or any key learnings or practices that you've discovered that aren't captured there that you might share.
Sure, 100%. I think I'll mention two things. I think one thing that comes directly out of what's just been said, and I think the description from Candace about the level of effort, the multivalent strategies deployed. Typically, none of this is in your Class D estimate at the beginning of the project, right? Where does that sit? How do you know what needs to be in that scope, and how do you plan for it? How do you budget for it? Because if you don't budget for it, it's very difficult for many owners to do it when they realize they need it. And so I think, I think historically, community engagement, tenant engagement has been a simple matter of a notice. In projects like this, it is a much more complex strategy that would really benefit from a kind of best practice scope of work that owners could take and start with and say, this looks like X number of dollars on day one, and plan for that. And certainly I would also say that that when it comes to funding that's out there, one might ask whether some of that funding might be deployed as particularly to that. The second thing I think that is abundantly clear to us after we've done projects like this many, many times is, we're architects, engineers. I think many of the people on this call are. And even from a building owner perspective, we think about carbon, we think about operational costs. There's a whole bunch of objectives that are in our minds when we're planning a project like this. However, for me living in my home, for most people living in their homes, that is not a priority. And especially if you're in a position like many of the projects we're working in, where there are health issues, we're working in affordable buildings, deeply affordable buildings, those things may be very much last thing, right? Carbon is a very abstract concept. So we never start our projects from a design perspective thinking about carbon. We always start from the perspective of comfort. What is high quality housing? What does that mean? What are people's real challenges in their homes? And really, truly showing up to listen to that. It may be that you do a project that is extremely low carbon, but if you start with comfort, you're always going to get to carbon. If you start with carbon, you might not get to comfort. And I think that that's an important learning for us. I will just say that that one of the things we hear time and time again is, I'm going to have air conditioning, because a lot of this stock does not have air conditioning as is. People are relying on shaker units or floor mounted units, and they don't do a very good job, let alone being energy hogs. So one of the things we can provide through these projects, and we need to talk about them that way, is resilience against our changing climate, which is in many cases deadly if you don't have proper cooling.
Yeah, all good points, yeah. As our understanding of these projects and our experience implementing them continues, we've got a lot more sense of, the impacts they're going to have both in construction, but also the outcomes and how we can, focus on some of those to make a better case and give people a sense of, what they're kind of like hunkering down in order to achieve at the end of the day. Wanted to ask, so and you brought in a lot of folks. You mentioned the different groups that were part of the TRP effort to identify learnings and generate the guide, and we have yourself, kind of the owner's advisor and the architect, and Candice on the ownership side as well, talking about the impacts on tenants and strategies. Any thoughts on how we can bring in, and I'm asking a little selfishly here because we're, as part of the Fortis project, we're drawing things out from different stakeholders, how we can bring in learnings from other stakeholders into that conversation. I guess trades are, very often right there working with tenants and in resident spaces. Any particular insights you think they have to offer, or how to draw their experiences and expertise into this body of knowledge?
Yeah, it's such a critical question because, we've seen tremendous efforts from all levels of government to provide dollars and incentives and structure to decarbonize buildings. But the last people to hear about it are typically the trades and the people implementing, the manufacturers, right? And so giving them the forward guidance that this is coming, that this is a major market sector, is truly, I think, one of the missing links. I think BC is ahead of Ontario in that respect, but with this BC step code. But I think that's going to be a tremendous opportunity to get the people on the ground innovating, because there are techniques that are going to make the work faster, that are going to make the work less invasive. And in more advanced markets, like in the EU, where retrofitting buildings has been mandated by the building codes for, decades, we're seeing technologies and systems and equipment that exactly does just that, plug and play systems for retrofit. Wouldn't that be nice? Thank you.
Great development. Candice, anything that you remember from, I mean, you guys met weekly, I think, with trades and had those long coordinating meetings. Any insights that you heard from the trades that helped to, make things a little less impactful for residents that you could pass on?
I think one of the things we were pretty firm on, the the trades always want to work within timelines that they can work according to their building permits. And for us, it was, no, you're not starting before 9 a.m. Forget it. And we had a lot of pushback on that. And I think once that bit of understanding was once they got it and they realized that it made a big difference, that helped a lot. Sometimes I found trades did not respect homes and did not respect people's private things. And I think I really liked what Yael said. It's a case of educating these folks on the importance of how that home is, because really at the end of the day, there's two things that a tenant or a resident really cares about. A is their salary and B is their home. Those are really emotional topics. So if you don't respect that home, and it doesn't matter who's going into there, you get such ramifications, and it doesn't matter how much good you've done, it is destroyed immediately. So I think educating the trades on the finesse of an occupied building is really, really imperative. Having people playing music on the scaffolding, you can't do that. You've got a person's home right there. They may be on a conference call. So we dealt a lot with that kind of thing. And I think that is definitely something that could do with a lot more education on behalf of trades, so they learn the importance of what it entails to be in a occupied building. I think those are lessons that you can never ever emphasize more to trades coming in. I mean, I caught people sitting having a sandwich in our lobby. Come on, guys, this is a front door to a building. It's almost like it's my home's front door. So I think it's really important that we educate trades, and it's an ongoing process, because unfortunately turnover happens. So it's something that you need to consistently work on, and they did. I mean, I must say RDH really worked hard on that together with us, but it's a never-ending stream. But I think we can get better. There's everything I believe we can do better at if we consistently keep it up.
And I imagine as those impacts lessened, their work became easier, and their relationships were that much better. So it probably redounded quite well. We've got the poll coming up for the closing, and that means we're just about out of time. And sorry, we've kind of monopolized the discussion in here between the panelists and folks. Any questions that anybody in the audience really wants to get off their chest and make sure is aired here? We've got a couple of minutes left as hopefully everyone's filling out the poll. Feel free to either drop it in the chat or unmute yourself and turn on your video, and yeah, let us know if you've got any thoughts. Well, as we wait for that, or if there's nothing from the audience, just wanted to really thank Candace and Yael for taking the time to share their expertise and their experience with us. Hopefully these retrofits are going to becoming, I wouldn't say fast and furious, but they're becoming more common. They're becoming easier, and folks will be having an easier time wrapping their heads around them. And so this kind of experience and these techniques and strategies and understandings are going to be key to making sure that they proceed as low impact and as effectively as possible for everyone involved. So thanks everyone. Again, thanks to our presenters, and yeah, thanks for a lively chat. There's a lot coming through there, and I hope this was worthwhile and everyone got a lot out of it.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye, folks.